Oxford from the inside. The good, the bad, but always the truth.
Episode 90 of Oxford from the Inside, the good, the bad, but always the truth. Today we're joined by Peter Wallich. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm a third year, so final year student at St Hilda's College, Oxford, studying PPE. That is, or at least was before the pandemic, philosophy, politics and economics. And yeah, I'm really happy to be on this podcast.
I'm also from St Hilda's, so rep St Hilda's. Right, so welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about something quite important actually, especially now in times of COVID. That's the importance of self-studying at home, techniques to improve the way you learn, and also a little bit about some access schemes in Oxford. So, you recently self-published a book with some friends called Learn Better at Home. What were the initial thoughts that kickstarted your journey to writing the book?
Yeah, this is a good question. Thanks. So it was around March, April last year, and schools were being closed down. I was talking to some friends about educational disadvantage and what might happen with that, because I've already been thinking quite a bit about educational inequality, and with schools open, at least, there's some sort of social leveler. Some schools might be able to do a better job than other schools in certain ways, but everyone's going to school and going to a physical place for a certain amount of time every day. But then with school closures, that all went away. And the thought was, what can we do to help students the most? The trouble is we didn't really know. So we ran some surveys online, and we came to the conclusion that a self-study guide could be useful. And actually, there was so much to say, we felt that it turned into an ebook, because students aren't often taught how to self-study effectively. And we couldn't find a comprehensive student-written self-study guide. So something that wasn't specific to, say, one subject, or to, for example, how to build motivation or how to do well in exams, or how to form good habits, but something that covers sort of the whole range of things, that all the ingredients that go into a successful self-study program, I guess. And that's how we started it. That's the story. And then a lot of drafts and a lot of long Skype calls later, we had something that we sent around and got online, and students have benefited from. And some have said it's really helped them. So maybe you could be one of them too. If you're a student listening to it, you can get it online at learnbetterathome.com. It's freely available, although we encourage donations to give directly, if possible. Give Directly is a high impact charity that supports some of the poorest people in the world, a lot of whom have been affected very hard by COVID-19. So that's a possibility, but we don't want anyone to not have access to it, our book, on the grounds of how much money they have. So everyone can get it for free from that site too.
I definitely concur with your point about there being very few books written by students for students, especially about studying at home. So I think it's absolutely great that you've written a book, and it can be really helpful to many students. How would you define the concept of self-learning? Why is it important?
Another good question, and I think a difficult one. So I guess one way of thinking about it is teaching yourself, and self-learning is just as vague as that. It's just as broad as that. Anything from independent study, where you have lecture slides or recommendations from a teacher on what to do, but you're doing it yourself, I think counts, but also right the way to total autodidactism. So where you're learning things just because you want to learn them and how you want to learn them, and figuring it all out for yourself. So the book focuses more on the first end of that spectrum. So where you have a predefined course, and say that's an exam course, an online course you decide you want to study, and you're trying to figure out how to study that on your own without the structure of, say, being in a classroom physically in school. But the stuff that we talk about could also apply more generally. And we wrote the book trying to focus on school students, but actually be as general as possible while still being useful, so that it could cover any sort of learning, and it wasn't just about sort of learning how to pass an exam, even though that's obviously important on its own.
Yeah, that's
and why?
very true.
Yeah, you asked also the second part of this question. Why is self-learning important? And I think there are sort of two parts to this. The first is the kind of obvious immediate sense in which it's important, particularly right now with schools shut. Grades matter. People take grades into more account than they should. It's a good idea to get good grades if you can. And it's helpful to academic success in general that you can be able to study yourself, so that if you miss out on things in lessons or you want to go further, you're able to do that effectively and you're confident about that. But I think there's a second broader reason why you should care about self-studying, and that's that it can actually turn you into a lifelong learner. And I know that sounds really cliche, but if it is cliche, it's cliche for a reason, because particularly right now, as the world is changing almost beyond recognition, and people have said that for years, but look at the last 2 years, being able to adapt is contingent on being able to learn things and being able to learn new things in new ways. So I think that means you have to learn things on your own. Not every time is there going to be a course available for it, or a teacher easily able to teach you. Which means, to sum all of this up, you end up in a situation where you might have been locked out of school, stuck at home, but actually you can learn one of the most important skills you'll ever learn. You might be learning it by necessity, but it will help you far beyond GCSEs and A-levels or uni exams.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And actually, it's funny you say we're all learners, because I think even teachers had to learn how to use Zoom to give online lectures. And even then, they can get it hilariously wrong.
Absolutely.
How do you think students' working environments have changed over the lockdown period? Do you think it's easier or harder to study?
So I think it probably depends a lot on the person. Do you have a quiet space to study, a family situation that's conducive to study and not too difficult to deal with? Do you have a computer? Do you have internet access that works well and reliably? And I think there's a whole different range of what people have available to them. But it's more than that, because it's not just what you have access to, it's also your own kind of disposition. So I think mental health issues can be made a lot worse under current conditions, and that probably doesn't help you study well. I've noticed that some people are affected by the relative isolation, just seeing fewer people in person a lot more than other people. So my sister's finding it really quite boring and quite difficult, and more than I think I am, even though we're in very similar situations. So I think, yes, in theory, it could make studying easier because you have extra time, you don't have to travel anywhere, and you have fewer commitments. But I think all of these other effects in general probably make it harder for a lot of people. How much harder will depend on the person, really.
A good response, yeah. With schools shut for most people during lockdown? I mean, I think they are going to be a reopening soon. The government said March the 8th, but for now, do you think that this will affect students' learning and preparation for exams?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. The sort of trivial answer is, yeah, it probably will. So firstly, online teaching isn't the same as in-person teaching. Being forced to go to school, whether you like it or not, and sit at a desk for a certain number of hours might not be ideal for a lot of reasons, but it might at least give you a sort of minimum baseline. And it's, it gives you an environment that at least was designed for study, even if it's not always the best for that. I'm not a big fan of the traditional education system, but there are some advantages of it. The problem is online teaching can vary really wildly. So some people have really great online teaching, other people maybe don't. And that will often depend on the resources available to the school and a whole bunch of other things. I'm not going to sort of critique why that is, but it's just a fact that lots of studies have shown. And what that means is that you need to self-study more. So a lot of people getting much less online learning, and they need to motivate themselves to study more. But like I said, although that's really difficult to do, it's also a great opportunity to self-study effectively. So I think maybe there are two groups of students. There's a group of students who is going to that's going to end up doing worse from this because lacking that support, they don't get sort of pushed along the conveyor belt towards good grades. But there's also a group of students that are going to figure out how to self-study and are going to do much better than they would have done before. I don't know which group is going to be bigger, but I think what's most important if you're a student is that you get to choose which group you're in.
That's very true. And I think there are benefits to both groups, and it's really up to you which one you think is the best for you. And if it works the best for you, then don't let anybody else tell you otherwise, I think. So actually, on that note, can you share any of your tips of how to self-learn at home for our student listeners? Are there any that you found particularly useful for your exams or at university?
The first thing to say is that what works for one person isn't necessarily what will work for another person. Self-studying is, like a lot of things, very personal. But in our book, we try to share a wide range of tips. And this is drawing upon some scientific research, but also experiences from the three co-authors and I. So hopefully there's quite a range there. As for what to do, yes, let's start in general. I think there's basically a three-stage process, which is, firstly, be honest with yourself and try to figure out what bottlenecks you have in place of your goals. So if your goal is to reach a certain level in a subject, then you probably need to do a certain amount of work to achieve that. And for some reason you're not at the moment. Why is it that you're not doing that work? Is it because you don't think it's possible? You just don't think you're going to be able to achieve that goal? Is it because you know that you could if you really tried, but you just can't really be bothered? Or is it because you're sitting down at your desk, but you're not actually working that effectively? Because these are all different problems. The next stage is to try to figure out how to fix that bottleneck. And we have some tips for that in our book. And the third stage is to iterate, to rinse and repeat. The first thing you try is probably not going to fix every issue that you have. And you're a human, you're going to make mistakes and waste time and study inefficiently from time to time. The idea is to just move in the right direction, and getting a bit better every day will push you a really long way forward. I think mindset is also really key. So this sounds cliche, but again, I think it's true. Learning can actually be really fun if you think about it as trying to understand something new. Exams can be less fun. The way to make them more fun is to treat them like a game. It's not to say that they're not important. Some games are very important, but they're a game to be won. They have rules, and someone's, particularly A-level GCSE, the rules are quite clear-cut. You can look up what you can be tested on. You can look up what the examiners have said from previous years, examiner reports. You can look up what the mark scheme is. And so you know the rules. And the trick is, how do I win this game in the most efficient way possible? I know that kind of sounds like it's coming from someone who's never struggled with exams. Of course, exams are kind of a fun game if you go to Oxford, right? I don't think that's actually true. Like, I've done badly in exams before, thankfully not in important exams, but I've had bad exam technique before. And it's not always fun. But if you treat exams like a game, instead of a sort of measure of self-worth, I think you can end up doing a lot better. And because it's a game, you can think of it more as it's a game that can be won. So why don't I try to win it? Why can't I do it? Of course you can. I think as a rule of thumb, almost anyone can do almost anything. So there are very specific things that I personally find useful. Like, for example, when I take a short break, I will try to not make it too interesting. I'll try to just like get some water or something, but not look at my phone or whatever, because that way I might get distracted. It might become a longer break. And there are specific things that I do with my own study routine that I think are cool, but I know that that's really personal. And I think maybe the big picture of here's this approach to iterating towards success, and here's this approach to trying to win this exam game, which I think will be on a lot of people's minds, is maybe a better starting point.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think you're right. Just because you get into Oxford doesn't mean we find all exams easy. I did 4 A levels. I got a C in one of them. Not going to say what it was, but I did do badly in an exam, and it can happen to everybody, regardless of where you are and who you are. So, do you think that people can be different types of learners? How would the techniques used to self-study be different for a book learner or a hands-on active learner?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question. And disclaimer, I'm not a psychologist. I don't really know much about the brain. But my impression is two things, really. Firstly, yeah, people do seem to have different cognitive preferences. So, like, if there's something that you need to learn, different people do seem to prefer to learn it in different ways, and maybe they're faster at learning it in different ways. And that might be something to take advantage of. But I think there's a mythology around, like, what type of learner are you? I'm a kinesthetic learner. Are you a visual learner or whatever? And like, this was a convenient and plausible thing that a lot of people believed and still believe, but study after study shows that there's no evidence for it. So for example, there was this study I was looking at recently that looked at one classification, one of the first sort of learning styles classifications. It found out if you gave an anatomy test to people and you split them into two groups, one group had to take the quiz, and I think within that group they used learning, they tailored their revision to their learning style and their study to their learning style. The other group didn't. There was no difference in outcome. So that might seem counterintuitive if you've been brought up on the sort of learning style quizzes and things, but I think the tension here can be resolved. I think on the one hand, yes, there will be ways that you can learn better than other ways for a given bit of material. On the other hand, it's not as simple as like, I'm this type of learner, I'm that type of learner. So how do you take advantage then of the better ways to learn for you? I think the answer is just try a bunch of different things and see what works best for you. And you need to know that that could change over time. And for different types of material, you might learn it best in different ways. I personally wouldn't lose too much sleep over like defining myself as one type of learner or another, because I think it's just very simplistic and there's no evidence for that. Instead, I'll just try different things and see what works.
That's actually a really good idea. And I think that's something that people can do and may struggle to understand, like, oh, what do I try first? But I think you'll kind of understand after a week or two of trying a particular method, whether it's the one that works for you or not. I think what you've said is very eloquently put there. Have you been involved in any other access schemes in Oxford? And what do you kind of hope to achieve through those initiatives?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, Echo's back again. This is interesting. Zoom. All hail Zoom. Let's see. Yeah, so I've been very lucky to have been involved in quite a few access schemes over my time at uni. Probably the one I've been most involved in is Inside Uni. So Inside Uni crowdsources information from current students, things like interview experiences, subject guides for what to read and where to learn more about your subject, and also video sessions, and it puts it all online for everyone for free, and it's entirely student run. I set up the Oxford arm of that, and now I'm working with the team in general to do some sort of strategy stuff as we look to expand and do more cool, new, exciting things. I've also been involved in mentoring schemes like Project Access and Zero Gravity. That has been something that I found great. It's really rewarding. You get to work directly one-on-one with people and hopefully find ways to add value, to basically level the playing field, where some people get loads of good advice and support when they're going through this quite scary application process and other people don't. And the final thing that I was involved with some time back is debating outreach. So I used to be a competitive debater, and through that, I ended up traveling to different parts of the country and talking to kids in school about how to debate, and also trying to link this to a place like Oxford or university in general, which encourages sort of scholarly discovery and debate and all of that cliche, which is kind of true. So why did I do all this? I think there's a big part of me that recognizes the system is very unfair, that I was lucky that I had some good support when I was applying, and I knew some people who'd gone through the process, and I just want to make that system a bit fairer. And knowing that top universities are often gatekeepers to top positions sort of in society where there's a top position of responsibility, rather, want to make sure that that actually that takes in a representative pool of people from across all of society, and not just like a bunch of people who look like me.
That's a really good cause. And just to say, with Inside Uni, I'm a biochemist. I've looked on the website of some biochemist statements from those had interviews, and actually really, really useful, really good. So I definitely recommend checking out the subjects you're going to apply for if you're thinking of applying to Oxford or Cambridge. I know you've already mentioned it, but maybe it's good to say again, where could our student listeners find your book and get their hands on a copy?
Sure. So our website is learnbetterathome.com. And if you go on that site and scroll down, you can grab a PDF. There's an option to donate. You'll see on the website that if you type 0 into that, you can get it for free. But if you do have some money to help some of the poorest people in the world, then we'd all really appreciate that. And it might actually help you get more out of the book, because there's some evidence that when people associate something with money, so I have to pay to get something, they treat it as more valuable. I think the idea is, well, you know, if I paid to get this thing, clearly at some point I thought it was valuable, so I'm more likely to read it and take it seriously. So we were thinking about this actually when we were coming up with the book. You know, how do we get this to the most people, but also raise money for good causes and make sure that it's taken seriously, because we put quite a lot of effort into writing it, and we think it has some useful things to say. And this was our sort of attempt at combining all of these. So you can get it for free, but we recommend making a small donation if you feel able to.
It sounds to me a bit like one of those honesty box schemes where you can take it, but it's always good to give something to the honesty box.
I guess it is actually the online equivalent of that.
Yeah.
It's just that no one's watching, right? So we're not going to judge you if you don't. It's all fine.
True. But I would recommend donating if you can and if you'd like to. So I think, unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. We've learned some really interesting stuff, actually. Thank you for sharing your experiences to me, to the students listening, and to everybody at Oxford from the Inside. Also, thank you to our followers for listening to this podcast, watching this YouTube video, or on Instagram. And remember to follow us at Oxford from the Inside. Check out our Facebook page for regular updates. And I hope you all stay safe and well. Goodbye.